So we're going to continue with the team history videos here on the channel, and it's been kind of fun going back, looking at the history of some of these teams, and even just looking at the rivalries over the decades, and even just looking year by year, the changes that the league has gone through with different teams, different rule changes. It almost got me a little excited about the idea of maybe doing a season by season recap, going back to when the OHL was had the name OHL for the first time in the 1980-81 season. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you might be interested in. I'm a little excited about doing that, and I want to do the team videos first. That's probably maybe something I'll do down the road. So today, let's take a look at one of the oldest teams in junior hockey. It's the Oshawa Generals. They officially started their junior hockey existence in 1937-38. But history can trace this team back as far as 1908. So a lot of history to dive into when it comes to the Oshawa Generals. And one thing of note for Oshawa, they did go on hiatus from 1953 until 1962. Their home arena, the Hembley Arena, burnt down. And because of that, the Generals not able to play. And it wasn't until 1962 when the team was able to come back with some assistance from the Boston Bruins. And I talked about it in the London Knights video, how NHL teams sponsored junior hockey. And for the London Knights, when they were the Nationals, they were actually sponsored by the Toronto Maple Leafs up until 1968. So for Oshawa, they were sponsored by the Boston Bruins. And that's why you'll see pictures of Bobby Orr when he played for the Oshawa Generals in the yellow and black. And that's the only time Oshawa wore those uniforms. Outside of that, they were always primarily red, blue, and white. And of course, the General's name coming from General Motors, which is very, when you think of Oshawa and cars, you always think of General Motors, and that's where the General's name came from. So it is kind of neat to see. But when they did come back after the arena fire, they played a season at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. So they didn't go back to Oshawa. They shared an arena with the Toronto Marlboros and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then when the Oshawa Generals were ready to go back into the junior circuit, then they went to Bowmanville, played a season there before the Oshawa Civic Auditorium finally opened in 1964. And the Generals would play there right up until 2006 at the now named Tribute Community Center. So it's really fascinating the journey this team has been. But despite all that, very competitive throughout their history. And let's look at some of the players that stand out, the top 10 scorers in franchise history. And right at the top of the list, Mark Savard, 413 points as an Oshawa General. He had 132 goals, 281 assists, and of course, made a name for himself at the National Hockey League level, and then was a head coach of the Windsor Spitfires, right now looking to join another NHL team. We'll wait and see where he lands currently, but Mark Savard leads the way in Oshawa Generals scoring. Number 2 on the list, John Tavares. Of course, he was given the exceptional status. He was the very first player in Canadian Hockey League history to be given exceptional status. He was drafted as a 14-year-old. And during his time with Oshawa, 183 goals, 200 assists, 383 points. And you may remember, if you're an Oshawa fan, he was actually traded to the London Knights in his draft year. So he didn't finish out his junior career in Oshawa, which is kind of too bad. You kind of figure if he did stay in Oshawa the rest of that season, would he have passed Mark Savard for the all-time leading scorer in franchise history? But as it is, he is second when it comes to scoring with the Oshawa Generals. Third is Daryl LaFrance. He had 147 goals, 199 assists, 346 points. Tony Tanti, he was a fan favorite. He's fourth in scoring overall, 177 goals, 161 assists, good for 338 points. Fifth is Scott McCrory, 112 goals, 203 assists, good for 315 points in his time as an Oshawa General. And then you have Dave Gans, sixth overall, 119 goals, 191 assists, 310 points. Seventh in franchise scoring is Lee Giffen, 119 goals, 191 assists, 310 points. And you'll see here, there's a lot of high-end talent that has played with this Oshawa Generals team. Then number 8 is Don Biggs, 101 goals, 182 assists, 283 points during his time with the Generals. Ninth in scoring is Scott Hollis, 124 goals, 146 assists, 270 points. And then rounding out the top 10 is Brent Gavreau. He had 100 goals during his time in Oshawa to go along with 170 assists and 270 points. So considering the long history of this Oshawa Generals franchise, it's pretty impressive to have your name in the top 10 in scoring. When we look at goaltenders, Peter Sirkowitz, he had 81 wins during his time with the Oshawa Generals. He would go on to play in the National Hockey League, spend time with the Hartford Whalers. It was actually kind of fun when I was looking him up because I wasn't familiar with him. And when I saw he played for the Hartford Whalers, it's kind of excited. I love seeing those Hartford Whaler jerseys. So Sirkowitz led the way in wins in franchise history for the Oshawa Generals. Second, Daniel Altschuler, a more recent goaltender. He had 78 wins as an Oshawa General. Jeremy Brodeur, 70 wins with Oshawa, puts him third overall. Kyle Kaiser, he's fourth with 67 wins. And rounding out the top five, Tyrone Garner. He had 64 wins as a member of the Oshawa Generals. And when you have such a long history, they have some big names who have had their number retired. Starting off, number 2, Bobby Orr, of course, coming from Parry Sound. I didn't realize this, but he would drive down to Oshawa every weekend to play for the Generals, and then during the week be back home in Parry Sound. That's the arrangement they had for him during his time with Oshawa. So his number 2 retired. Red Tilson, his number 9, along with Dave Andrechuk. He wore number 9. Andrechuk, he's the latest player to have his number banner raised at the Tribute Community Center. And then Tony Tanti, his number 22, has been retired. Mark Savard, no surprise, his number 27, also retired. Big number 88 retired. Of course, that's Eric Lindros. He ended up joining the Oshawa Generals after being drafted by the Sioux Greyhounds. He didn't want to report to Sault Ste. Marie and then ended up joining Oshawa. And of course, he was a part of the Memorial Cup team that defeated the Kitchener Rangers. That was actually a fascinating Memorial Cup because the Dukes of Hamilton at Copps Coliseum, they were supposed to host that Memorial Cup, but the Dukes, not a very competitive team. They didn't even make the playoffs that year. So what they decided was that the finalists would both go to the Memorial Cup, and Oshawa would join the Kitchener Rangers at the Copps Coliseum Memorial Cup that year. And Eric Lindros, a big part of that. And then number 91, John Tavares, he had his number retired with the Oshawa Generals. I would expect we're going to see a few more names added to that list, considering the players who have played on this team since. And speaking of that, the Oshawa Generals have the second most players to ever play in the National Hockey League after wearing the general colors. They have 190, which is impressive, only behind the London Knights. So London and Oshawa 1 and 2 when it comes to players heading off to the National Hockey League. Now, I'm not going to cover all the playoffs that the Oshawa Generals have ever been in. The cutoff is going to be the year 2000. I did the same thing with the London Knights history video. So back in 2000, they were knocked out in the first round by the Ottawa 67s in 5 games. Oshawa-Ottawa, a great rivalry between those two teams. But then in 2001, Oshawa, they would miss the playoffs. Back into the postseason in 2002, where they lost in the first round to the Belleville Bulls. That was in 5 games. I really do miss the Belleville Bulls. I hope we can have Belleville back in the OHL circuit at some point in the future. Then in 2003, they would advance to the second round of the playoffs, but Ottawa again knocking them out, that time in 6 games. And then in 2004, they lost in the first round to the Mississauga Ice Dogs. Yes, the Mississauga Ice Dogs. They lost to them in 7 games. That year, actually, Mississauga would go all the way to the OHL Championship, where they ended up losing to the Guelph Storm in the final. So there we go. We're having the name drop, the Mississauga Ice Dogs. That's a name we haven't heard in quite a while. But then after that, Oshawa would miss the playoffs in 2005 and 2006. But during those lean years, that's when John Tavares would get his exceptional status and would be drafted by the Generals and go on to have a fantastic junior hockey career. In 2007, back in the playoffs, they lost in the second round to Belleville in 4 games. And then 2008, it looked like Oshawa, they were going to be the top team in the Eastern Conference, but ended up losing the conference final to the Belleville Bulls in 5 games. So that was John Tavares versus PK Subban. That was a Belleville Bulls team that was quite competitive with George Burnett, behind the bench. And that final, of course, Belleville would go on to face Kitchener in the OHL championship and then lose in 7 games to the Rangers in that classic. But after that, Oshawa missing the playoffs in both 2009 and 2010. That's how come John Tavares would be traded to the London Knights in that 2009 season. They'd return to the playoffs in 2011. They would go all the way to the second round and lose to Niagara, the Niagara Ice Dogs, in 5 games. Niagara would get the best of them again in 2012. That was a first round exit in 6 games. 2013, Oshawa making it to the second round, but were swept by the Barrie Colts that season. But then in 2014, the Oshawa Generals would make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Final and were swept by the North Bay Battalion. That was quite the run for Oshawa, and then they do one better the following season, 2015. They won the OHL championship in 5 games over the Erie Otters, who of course had Connor McDavid. McDavid was named playoff MVP, received the Wayne Gretzky Trophy in that series, despite being on the losing side, but that didn't seem to bother the Oshawa Generals, who had the likes of Anthony Cirelli, who would then go on to win the Stanley Cup at Tampa Bay, because Oshawa would win the Memorial Cup in 2015, defeating the Kelowna Rockets, who had Leon Draisaitl in their lineup. It's amazing when you look back and you see the players that were on some of these junior teams. And it's just, if you were able to see those players at the time and then think that in the future, these players are going to develop and become Stanley Cup contenders or Stanley Cup champions. That's what's so great about junior hockey, being able to see the players now and then follow along where they go. But Oshawa having a fantastic run in 2015, OHL champions and Memorial Cup champions that year. After that, though, they would be knocked out in the first round by the Kingston Frontenacs in 2016. That was a 5-game series. 2017, they would lose in the second round to the Mississauga Steelheads. That was in 5 games. 2018, the Niagara Ice Dogs show up again of a first-round exit. That was in 5 games. 2019, the Oshawa Generals would go back to the Eastern Conference Final, this time losing in 4 games to the Ottawa 67s. Like I said, Ottawa-Oshawa, such a great rivalry between those two teams. Then, of course, we lost the 2020 playoffs, no season in 21. But then in 2022, they would lose in the first round to the Kingston Frontenacs. That was in 6 games. 2023, so the last season, they lost in the first round to Ottawa in 5 games. But the season we just finished, the Oshawa Generals returned to the OHL final. They would take on the London Knights, and of course, the Knights would sweep that series. So Oshawa falling just short from getting to that championship or winning that championship and ultimately the Memorial Cup. But really, this is an Oshawa Generals team that so much history. They have a league record 13 OHL championships. They've won 5 Memorial Cups. It's been quite impressive just to see what Oshawa is able to do. But when you look at the future for this Oshawa Generals team, there are some question marks. I kind of feel being a team like Oshawa, they shouldn't have their future in jeopardy. But last season, we learned that there were some disagreements between Oshawa Generals owner Rocco Tullio and the city of Oshawa over a lease agreement. The lease at the Tribute Community Center expires in 2031. And for Tullio, he would like to see the city build more office space at the Tribute's Community Center. They also would like to see some other upgrades at the arena. Like I said earlier in this video, the Tribute's Community Center, it was built in 2006. But because of that agreement, Rocco Tullio has looked elsewhere. So Oshawa could relocate. I think it's very doubtful that we lose the Generals. But he has been speaking with Durham Live and Pickering Development. So that's at the casino just off the 401. They're willing to build a 6,800-seat arena to house the Oshawa Generals or OHL hockey. So keep that maybe in the back of your mind as we move forward, that maybe Pickering, could that be a future home for the Ontario Hockey League or even just the Oshawa Generals? So time will tell. Rocco Tullio has said that it takes about 5 years to prepare for a move such as this. So if the lease is up in 2031, we should find out in the next couple of seasons if the Generals are in fact serious about potentially relocating to the city of Pickering. So if that's the case, Do they keep the Generals name? Do they become the Pickering Generals? Do they keep the Oshawa Generals brand? What do they do? I know those are a lot of future questions. I still don't think it will ever happen. But stranger things have taken place. So just keep that in the back of your mind as the Oshawa Generals, despite all this history, all these championships, the atmosphere at the Tributes Community Center is something else. The one thing, though, if you're in the media, you have to go over the ice on the catwalk to get to the press box. So if you're afraid of heights, it could be a little stressful, but it is fascinating what each arena has for character, and that's just the charm for the media. They have to actually walk over the catwalk to get to the press box, and it is. I love going to Oshawa. I was there for the playoffs, and the Barrie Colts played them in the first round, and I would think we're going to see the Generals long into the future. So that's the history video for the Oshawa Generals. I will be doing some more team videos. You can see the playlist. I have that on the channel, as this is the third team that we've done. And we still have 17 more teams to cover. So again, thank you very much for tuning in. If you've made it this far in the video, I appreciate you tuning in. Give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to stay tuned with everything that's going on around the Ontario Hockey League. I do have an interview coming up to talk a bit about the upcoming NHL draft and the OHL players that could hear their names called at the Sphere in Las Vegas later this month. So again, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again soon.